Oh, thank you. I come here often. I love this opening Parshia, Perashat Tisa, because it talks about the half shekel. I often reference it during Yom Kippur. Let's reference it first now and then see if hopefully we can start to put together a lot of the ideas and the pieces that we've been discussing together. I hope that I'm able to impart to you the feelings that I have about Parashat Tisa now that we learned Parashat Yitro and Teruman Tetzaveh with this idea of the Torah being in its, or exploring the option that this really has been intended to be delivered to us in this way. I'll take a step back and I'll say this week's parasha is going to have the sin of the golden calf. And we've said it in previous classes. I'll just repeat it so we all have our thoughts together. The big debate is whether or not what preceded this week's parasha, which was the laws of building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, whether or not they were in their proper placement. The last 2 weeks, we learned about building the Mishkan and building the vessels for the Mishkan. This week, we're going to hear about Parashat Shekalim, which we're going to learn now together in depth, and about the sin of the golden calf. I'd say those are probably the two main highlights, and the aftermath of the golden calf, which is where I'm going to want to spend some time as well, hopefully. So if we just keep plowing along and keep moving in the direction that God had told us to build a Mishkan before Chet HaEgel even happened, that this was information that was given to Moshe when he was up on Har Sinai, when he was collecting the first set of luchot, the first tablets. And all of this was plan A. All of this was part of what Hashem wanted for us. Then with that idea, we'll go into Parashat Tisa. So at the end of last week, if you'll just turn back to the last few Pesukim, you'll notice something very interesting and beautiful. If you start, for instance, from verse 6, and this is why I love, if you have your own Chumashim, you could actually highlight in verse 6, where it's talking about, for instance, the incense altar. It's going to say that you're going to place it in front of the parochet, which is by the Aron Ha'edut, in front of the kaporet. If I lost you, I'm in chapter 30, verse 6. Just wanted to take you to the end of last week's Pesukim because I want to point out a very important piece to our story, which is even in speaking about the incense altar. So I really should back up and say, when we spoke about the Aron, we said how the measurements were in halves, 1.5 by 2.5, and how the measurements of the covering for the Aron were in halves, 1.5 and 2.5. And we were saying how the top covering may have represented our spiritual connection to God, God and his Keruvim and his Shekhinah all rest on the top part, and we were the bottom box, and we fit perfectly, and we complemented each other beautifully. And we went from there saying, if the Aron is a representation of man and God, and how beautifully we allow for each other to rest in each other's domain, God is bringing heaven down to earth, resting on the top of our box, and we're building our box all the way up to meet Shekhinah. If that's a perfect ben adam makom, if that's a perfect connection between man and God, then we said last week, maybe what's beautiful about the bigdei kehuna, about the clothing that the Kohen Gadol wore, we said that he wore linen and wool together, and we suggested that the linen might have represented the farmer, which was Cain, and the wool would have represented the shepherd, which was Hevel, and maybe by the Kohen Gadol wearing those two elements together, he was also bringing Adam lechavero. He was going to bring brotherhood. He was going to make a reparation for that relationship. So if there was a relationship that needed to be shored up or established, the reparation between God coming down to earth, like he did in Har Sinai, would be represented by the Aron, which have the Luchot from Har Sinai. And again, if Torah is about giving us a journey or a pathway to achieve an ideal, which was laid out earlier in Bereshit, then we'll start to see through these parshiot that the ideal was that man and God have their own unique and unfiltered relationship. Here, today, I want to continue with that, but in a totally different way. I'm bringing you to the end of Perashat Tetzaveh. Hopefully that now brings together what we want to discuss today. At the end of Perashat Tetzaveh, in the last few Pesukim, we have this word kaporet, vekiper, kipurim, yichaper. We have this word, it's called a milah mancha. It's a word that is recurring over and over, which is the word kaporet. Now we know the kaporet, again, was the part that was on top, that sat on top of the bottom box of the Aron that had the luchot, and the kaporet had on it the cherubs. And in front of that was the Ner Tamid, which we said, again, very much represented what took place in Gan Eden, where God had put Keruvim, and he put this cherev mitapechet, a ever-turning sword, a flame that had a flame to it. And so maybe we were recreating the scenario in Gan Eden here on earth. And in recreating the scenario, the name for the vessel that's going to most represent our gateway to Gan Eden, our gateway to Shekhinah, our gateway to the ideal, the name for that vessel is going to be a kaporet, which means kaporet. I can spend the whole day just talking about this one word, because kaporet sounds like Yom Kippur, but Yom Kippur only sounds like Yom Kippur because the word kapor, the chaf peresh verb, is so rich with meaning. It means a covering. It also means, if you see the English, it'll probably say an atonement, a kapara, like kaparot, the chickens are an atonement, where one thing takes the place of the other. The kaporet, which is the top of the Aron HaKodesh, that in and of itself is going to be a way for us to achieve some type of ideal, an initial, original ideal that God had for us. If that's the case, now I just wanted you to have in your mind the idea that the Torah has been using this word kaporet even when it's talking about the incense, because the incense is going to be placed in front of this. And we could talk about why the incense is placed in front of the kaporet. Maybe we should take 1 second to talk about that. What the incense did was it created a smoke screen. If somebody could answer Rachel Diamond, she's having trouble signing in. I don't know how to get in touch with her, but if anybody on this class is friends with her, you can text her and say we are on and live. And the Zoom name is my name, Vivien Hidary. So this kaporet, this incense, this ketoret, which was a combination of herbs that created a scent, it also created a smoke screen. And it had to be placed in front of the kaporet, in front of the Aron, in front of the structure that's on top of the Aron that has the two cherubs, because the spirit or the essence, the Shekhinah of God, couldn't be directly seen by the people, and this smoke screen provided like a sense of privacy. We're going to talk about that as well. Why did we need a smoke screen? We'll talk about all of those things, but let's get first into Perashat Tisa. Perashat Tisa, so I will just tell you from the onset, so if you have your markers and highlighters, you can just do it while I'm speaking. The end of last week had the word kaporet 4 times, and this time it's going to have the word kapar, the same verb, also 4 times in a very short succession. In 4 or 5 Pesukim, we're going to see 4 of these Kippurim words again. And just for our own sake, if we wanted to sit and wonder why this word kapor or kapara is being referenced 8 times, I would like to suggest is that everything that's happening with the kaporet is something that is not within the 7s. It's supernatural, it's me'al hateva, it's not part of the natural cycle. And that's the very point that God is going to want to make now with the machatzit hashekel. So I'm saying a lot of things. I'm going to start to put them together slowly. Let's look into the Pesukim. The one thing I didn't say about the word kaper or kapor, which means an atonement, it also means a covering. That's what it is. It's a covering for the Aron. And what we had said about this word covering, that Yom HaKippurim is such a beautiful name for this holiday where God is going to allow us to atone for our misdeeds. It is very much along the lines of our saying, I know it's a time that we say vidui, and we're bearing our souls, and we're as transparent as possible. But at the same time, God is calling it Yom HaKippurim. We may call it the day that we have to reveal our most innards and be most sincere. And God is saying, I'm calling that day Yom HaKippurim. I want you to give yourselves a break. I want you to give yourselves a chance to cover yourselves up and not feel that I am piercing through your every indiscretion, because you won't be able to function if that's how you're going to approach Yom Kippur. It's actually one of the most generous words that we have in our Torah, that on the day where God is going to do an inspection, he's saying, I'm going to allow you to cover up those parts that aren't yet ready for inspection. I recognize that you still have things that you want to work on, and I'm going to give you time. But the sheer fact that you're going to vekaparta, that you recognize that you don't want me to see your unfinished product yet, that attitude is what's going to grant you atonement and a license and a certificate to continue the building process. So let's go first into today's Parashat Tisa. Let's see what's being said about the Machatzit HaShekel. These verses are called Parashat Shekalim. They're usually read on the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh Adar. And they're read, this year we had 2 Adars, so they're going to be read a month before the month of Nisan, of Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because this Machatzit HaShekel was due on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And so we gave the people a full month. We made the announcement. Everybody has to bring the Machatzit HaShekel within this month. Machatzit HaShekel was not a ton of money, first of all. You didn't need a full month in order to gather these funds together. It was possibly more like pocket change. So if we want to even think that this is read because we're talking about money, because we're talking about a half a coin, there's something way more relevant and significant about what's taking place here. And that's what I want to uncover together today. And just one more thing for you to notice. I know it's a big buildup, but I'm getting there. One more thing I do want you to notice is there is a lot of instruction before we even see the words Machatzit HaShekel. There's stuff that has to happen that doesn't, let's look at it together. Okay. So, Vaidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Me, I love that introduction. It's an introduction that most people might just sweep under the rug and move on. It's like a little melody that's introducing the main score. But for me, Vaidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, the way that God is going to speak to Moshe, he's going to go from dibur to amira. He's going to go from dialogue to monologue. He's going to go, in other words, he's going to go back to amira. Amira is like the ma'amarot, the way God created the world with vayomer. He's going from dibur, from this externalization of sound, to amira. Amira being a monologue, we constantly have amiras going on within us that we may or may not even be aware of. We're constantly speaking to ourselves. And then we could take it to the next level and say, when we're really tuned in, our higher self could speak to us. And then we could take it one level even deeper and say, and that's how we hear our godliness. That's how we hear our God speaking to us. All of this takes place internally, and all this is under the realm of Amira. And what does God want now? He wants to go from Dibur, where sound and voice is externalized, because for me to speak to you, I am going to be Vaidaber. Vaidaber in a dialogue means I'm going to formulate my words so that you could respond to me. So I'm going to take what's inside of me and bring it out in the hopes that there'll be a response that comes from your side back to me. Here, God is saying, okay, it's time to go back to basics. We're going to go back to Amira. Except in this Amira, when I created the world, let's go according to the commentaries, using 10 ma'amarot, 10 utterances. Now I want you and Bnei Israel, in creating your own world, to go to this place where I went when I created the world. And he says these words, it's beautiful. Ki Tisa et rosh Bnei Israel lepikudehem. I'm going to read the whole pasuk because there's a lot going on and I don't want to keep breaking it up. Venatnu ish kofer nafsho ladonai bifkodotam velo yeh bahem negef bifkodotam. In the loosest translation, the English is going to say that kitisa means when you take a census of the people and you count them lepikudehem according to their numbers. Each man is going to give a atonement for his soul to God when he's counting them, so that there will not be a plague. That's the loosest translation that I could formulate for you on that. And we do know that in the past, when David counted the people, there could be a plague could break out if the people are counted without God instructing it, or if they're counted in an improper way. I'm going to say today that as much as this is about a census and about counting the people, it's about something way more significant, because the word ki tisa doesn't say ki tispor or ki timnot. There are other words that we have that would signify that numbers are involved. Instead, it says ki tisa, and it's even more elegant. If we were talking about a census and counting the people, we are, but as well, we're talking about something else. If we were talking about a census, how gorgeous that the word for census is to raise up each person's head. Tisa et rosh, lift up every person's head in Bnei Israel. Instead of having them feel small and insignificant, which easily could happen when we have people being counted, when people want to minimize, devalue humanity, they will give them a number instead of a name. And so we've seen, unfortunately, to our horror, how in the Holocaust, they gave people numbers, because if I give you a name, then I'm giving you an identity and a humanity and a uniqueness. But if I give you a number, you're just one of many others. And your value is really just based on you're nothing. If you're number 407, 23, you're just one of thousands or millions. I often repeat this because it made a big impression on me. My son in college had done a paper on social loafing. And he said how when people are one of many, they most tend to loaf socially. Like the examples that he gave was if you're in a stadium and everybody's cheering or everybody's clapping or everybody's doing the wave and you don't feel like you want to get up out of your seat or you have weak knees, it doesn't matter. You could loaf socially because the other 40,000 fans are all doing it and your participation isn't of the utmost importance. The goal will be reached with or without you. Another example he used was voting. Too often we feel that so many people are voting, our vote doesn't really count. And so the idea that God is telling us here, when you're going to count the people, rather than have them feel small, Tisa et rosh, lift up their heads, pick up their heads, literally look at their faces. And then the next word is lepekudehem. And the English says according to their numbers, but we know that pakad is not about numbers. Pakad is the opposite of the finite nature of numbers. We know pekudehem means something way greater than that. When you lift up each person and you look them in the face, you know what you should be looking for? You should be looking for the level of pakad that is registered in their faces. What does that even mean? We know that pakad, the word was invented when Sarah had her baby. We know that pakad was created to describe a scenario where when the physical world says no, the spiritual world says no problem. When the physical world says impossible, the spiritual world says definitely we could do it. It could be done. And this pekudehem word here means to what extent do we live our lives? When you look at my face, when you look at a person's face, what I want you to be looking for is to what extent they govern their lives with pakad as being at the center. When we're encountered, when we come to crossroads, how do we process our next move? Do we go just based on the science and the physical world? And do we only base it on the knowledge that we have that's finite? Or to what extent do we incorporate in our thoughts and ultimately in the way that we make decisions and move forward? How much pakad, how much do we sprinkle into our choices or our decisions or our processing of our situation? How many times do we say, if he could make Sarah have a baby at 90 years old and the woman was an akara, let's say it means she didn't even have a womb and her husband's almost 100 years old. If God could do that, then my problem is definitely something that he could handle. If God could split the sea at the perfect moment, if God could take Yosef out of the dungeons, wipe him off and put him on the throne, then my problem really is not so terrible, because I'm going to insert in my calculations of my situation, pekudehem. How do I live my life? And this is why I gave the whole introduction of the Aron and of the Bigdei Kehuna. To what extent do I recognize that I'm just the bottom piece to the box? I have a cover, And that cover has cherubs and a Shekhinah. If I only see myself as the bottom of the box and I don't recognize that there's a counterpart that's part and parcel, that's my other half. I'm only utilizing or tapping into half of myself. I'm only tapping into the broken part of myself. I'm only tapping into my broken luchot. I'm not even recognizing that there's another set of perfectly whole luchot in here with me. It's part and parcel of who I am. I am not only the bottom of the box. I am the whole entity. So when we're looking at Perashat Shekalim, and it happens to be very beautiful that God is asking for a half a shekel, in case we forgot that we're only one half to a greater whole. You could go either way. You could say I'm half to a spiritual whole, or I'm half with my brothers and my community and my world at large. I'm never in this alone. Whatever this is, I'm never in it alone. I have an entire support team. I have people, physical beings in this world who can carry me. Tisa et rosh. We're going to actually lift you up. We're going to pick up your head and we're going to say, don't look down. Because when you look down, you see your feet and you see everything that's in the bottom half, everything that goes with that. Everything that the bottom represents. No, tisa et rosh. Right away, you're counting the people. Don't let them look down so you could tap them on the head. No. Lift up their chin, so to speak, and start them getting them to recognize they can look up. There's another part. They're not in this alone. As we keep going, it's beautiful. It says, "Venatnu ish kofer nafsho." Each man has to give a kofer. So we know the English word, the koffer, where you put the coins in. It's called a koffer because of this word here. It's where you put the money for the temple. But the Torah is saying something here very profound. He's saying that each man has to give a kofer nafsho, has to either cover up his soul or has to give a payment, an atonement for his soul. Either way, this works beautifully for our purposes today so that we could use the half shekel as relevant in our lives today. Because what's being said here is that when God or Moshe is going to count the people, take an accounting of the people, make the people accountable. The counting word in English is very, very generous for us to understand this. What are we being made accountable for? We're being made accounted for our pekudim. So on the one hand is, to what level does your tank have pakad in there? I know people who, no matter what happens, their first go-to is pakad. I don't care what it looks like. Hashem is going to help me. Of course, I'm going to help myself and do whatever I possibly can in my physical world, because we're half and half. But I'm counting on God to carry me through for the other part that is totally out of my hands. Pekudem also means remembrances. You'll see that word sometimes in the English. And maybe if you wanted to get stuck with that translation, you could say, to what level do we have a memory of all the times that God has gotten us out of a tight spot? That's the best thing to do. When you're in a tight spot, don't think of the failures, think of the successes. This month, please, Adar, we have 2 of them. You can't get better than 2 Adars. If the whole month, the whole year was 12 or 13 Adars, it would be phenomenal. Why? Because Adar is the time, and hopefully we'll be learning for Purim together, and we'll go through Megillat Esther. But Purim is the time where we see firsthand that the most gory of scenarios could completely not only become resolved and we're saved, but where the bad guys get theirs, where the very tree that Haman prepared for Mordechai is the tree that he ends up being hung on. Dayenu, if Mordechai would have just been spared, we would have said, Dayenu, thank you, you spared the Jewish people. No, says God. Please, in my world, I believe that Hashem gets pleasure out of surprising us and surpassing whatever our greatest outcome would have been. God comes in and says, oh, please, I could write a much happier ending than you can. And God writes happy endings that we would never think of, but that are totally normal in this realm of his, in the kaporet realm, in the realm where his Shekhinah rests. Everything and anything is possible. So getting back to our Hefer Shekel, we didn't talk about the Hefer Shekel, we talked about counting the people and making sure that they don't feel small, that they don't look down, that they start looking up, that they recognize how much greatness exists for them to tap into, for us to tap into. This is about us. I know we were counting the people back there in the desert, but we're learning about it today, because guess what? We too are being judged. How are we being judged? To what extent do we believe and embrace this pakad concept? How much of it are we drawing? And guess what we have to do? We have to give a kofer nafsho. I have to atone for my soul. Why do I have to atone for my soul when you're inspecting me? Because I'll tell you this, no matter how faithful and spiritual a person is, no matter how much we believe in the energies and the forces and the power of God's Shekhinah within us and our world, we are limited. God is infinite. We are finite. We are limited. We are restricted because we're in a body that's flesh and blood. We can't, for the life of us, possibly comprehend the scope of the magnitude of God's presence and God's power to manipulate our physical world. And because of that, we're always going to fall short. Even if we come up with the greatest scenario in our minds and we say, Hashem is going to help us through this, we're never going to ever imagine that we're going to walk through a body of water. And when the last one of us comes out safe, our enemies are all going to drown and their gold is all going to wash up ashore. You can't make this stuff up. And therefore, because the reason that we're making an atonement for our soul is because we can't. We have to give this machatzit hashekel because there's no way that we're going to tap into 100% of the potential that exists. And we're paying for the difference. We're giving a machatzit hashekel. I'll show it to you through the words better. It says, bifkodotam, we're going to give this kofer nefesh, where, by the way, it's talking about our soul. It's not even talking about our body, because it knows that our body is limited. The closest thing to tapping into the infinite is our nefesh, is our neshama, is our spiritual part. And our spiritual part, because it has a bottom half to it, all right, I'll just say it from now. Where I was taking you with this is, I want you to also marinate these ideas as we're learning this, is that we all are a physical representation of the Aron. We ourselves, meaning we have a lower half and an upper half. We have a spiritual part, our top, our brain, our thoughts, our ideas, and then we also have a lower part to us, a baser part to us. And our base, our physicality And our spirituality has to be integrated as well. And when we start to see that Parashat Shekalim is actually part of the process, the way we integrated the spiritual and the physical with the Aron, and we integrated the wool and the linen with the Kohen, we're integrating parts of our own selves, and to what degree we are fully and in a healthy way integrated, that's what's going to be looked at. And that's something that is ongoing. That is something, look, if you just look at this parashia as having to give half a shekel, you could wash your hands and say, I love you all, but we're not giving shekalim in this generation or right now, so this really doesn't apply to me. And the Torah is saying, this applies to you more than ever. This applies to every one of us to tell us that God is going to do an accounting. And when is he doing this accounting? It's going to happen in Rosh Chodesh Nisan, actually. We're getting the coins ready from now, but they must be handed in by Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because that is the first month of our year. That's our new year. Remember, Chodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim? If our new year starts in Nisan, then this is the New Year's resolution, so to speak, that we have to have in place by the time we come to Nisan. And that resolution means we have to do a kapara here, like we did a kapara in Rosh Hashanah at the beginning of Tishrei. And this Kippur is going to say, if you recognize that you have to pay, you have to make an atonement for your soul, because there's so much greatness that you can't possibly tap into all of it. So you're going to pay for the part that you didn't tap into. I'll be a little more clear about that in a minute. But then it says, Velo yihyeh bahem negev bivkodotam. Why would God send a negev? Why would God send a plague? What's the purpose of a plague? The plagues come when we don't recognize or can't recognize our potential and our unified existence with God. When we can't perceive that, when we can't grasp that, then God forbid there could be a plague. There's an imbalance. There is something that is not, it's a dis-ease. That's what a plague is a disease, because there's a dis-ease. There is not a flow between God and us. And now, it's not until this next verse that it says, Ze yitnu kol ha'over al ha'pikudim. Anybody who's going to have to, the words over al ha'pikudim, like from the word avera, to transgress, to miss, to pass over something. Over al ha'pikudim, that means that you didn't own this thing called pakad. You passed it up, you passed it over, you didn't embrace it properly. So you have to give a machatzit hashekel. You have to give half. You're giving a half of a shekel means I recognize that the other half of me is God, or the other half of me is my fellow man. I have to have these healthy relationships. Otherwise, God forbid, you know what dis-ease means? It doesn't have to come from a foreign place where God's going to strike people with the boils or some kind of a plague. They're telling us, I mean, if you want to know the greatest medical advice you'll ever get on the planet, you're going to get it here. Because diseases in the body, they happen when we listen to the voices in our heads that may tell us to worry, to be anxious, to become depressed, the voices that tell us it's all over, the voices that tell us, Hevel havalim, don't even bother, don't even try, don't even get out of bed today. It's all useless anyway. Those voices are the ones that create the dis-ease, the negif bahem. And if Parashat Shekalim is anything, it's a pep talk saying, humanity, recognize that you are made of two halves. You yourself have an upper body and a lower body, and you're part of an aron where you're the box and God is the cover. There is this total integration. And then it says, you're going to give a machatzit hashekel, b'shekel hakodesh, 20 gerah hashekel. Machatzit hashekel is a teruma lahashem. You know what it's going to do, this machatzit hashekel? It's going to leharim, teruma. It's going to raise you up to God. It's going to allow you every now and then we need a shot, a reminder, a booster that's going to say, I know you did all this in Tishrei, but you came to the halfway mark now. It's been 6 months since you did all your soul searching. And so now you need to do something physical, tangible, which is the machatzit hashekel, to remind you, because no matter how much you get inspired or no matter how much you get enforced and strengthened emotionally, you need a boost. And this is what this machatzit hashekel is. It's going to give us a boost. And it's going to say, I'll give you the last 3 pekudim because I want to take you somewhere else with this. It says the rich man shouldn't give more and the poor man shouldn't give less. That's in verse 15. From the machatzit hashekel, lechaper al nafshotechem. This is telling us that a scenario where we could feel small, where we could feel lost, where we could feel not just insignificant, but we could feel that we are out of options and we could feel that we're alone. I mean, there's so many things that people go through in their lives that Hashem is sensitive to. And he's saying, this is not just for the rich person or for the poor person. And it's interesting. I love when it says the rich person shouldn't give more, because it's usually the rich person who would have a tendency to think, kochi ve'otzem yadi. The rich person might think that he's got everything under control because he has so many control in other aspects of his life. That guy, when something becomes difficult in his life, something that he can't buy his way out of with money, that guy, lo yarbeh, he shouldn't have to give more, because why? Because he's the guy like the chita, who in Perek Shirah, the wheat, represents the rich person. He's the one, when he calls out to God, the voice that the wheat, the rich man has, is Mima amakim keraticha Adonai. The rich person is actually most removed from this concept of halfy, me and God, we're in this together. I'm not saying that about all rich people, God forbid. I'm just saying the tendency of wealth and financial security could lead a person to believe that he's got things under control. It also says about the poor person, the prayer of the barley is tefillah le'ani ki yishpoch sicho. He has to literally pour out his heart to God. What is he doing? He is going to ki ya'atov. He's going to, my Ashkenaz lady taught me the word shuck or shuckle when he does this, that the barley is constantly in movement. It doesn't have a base. It's not strong enough. He's the one who's praying like this because he is subject to the whims of the weather and the wind and his natural environment. And what does he do? He's yishpoch sicho. He's in constant conversation with God. So when something goes wrong for the poor person, it says lo yamit. You would think he doesn't have to give less because he's living every single day with pakad. He can't take a step without realizing that he needs God in his life. I use my friend Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof. Guy can't make a move without talking to God because every single part of his life is dependent on Chastei Hashem. I need to get to the next step. I need to put dinner on the table. I can't literally get to the next day without God coming into my life. So when it says that here that the poor person shouldn't give less, you might think that the poor person, when you're counting him, he has a ton of pakad inside of him. He's talking to God morning, noon, and night. He's 25% himself, 75% God, let's just say, because he's always so desperate. So he should have to pay a smaller fine because he's in constant communication with God. And the rich guy, he might be 75% himself and 25% God because he's doing pretty well on his own and things don't seem so dire at every turn of every corner. So he doesn't have to call out to God every single second. But what is the Torah saying? That every one of us, and when I say rich and poor here, I use the examples of financially rich and financially poor, but there's many ways of being rich. There's intelligence, there is strength, there are so many other things. That person who has either a lot of intelligence or a lot of strength or a lot of whatever it may be, he may end up feeling not as dependent as the guy who's a real miskin, who's a real nebuch, who has a real hard, did I use the word right? Who has a real tough time. That guy has to tap into God way more often. And because of it, he would have to pay a smaller fine. So there's a lot of ways to look at it. But regardless, here's how the verses end. It says, Velakachta et kesef hakipurim. This is our third kippurim of this chapter. And the fourth one's going to be at the end of the pasuk. Velakachta et kesef hakipurim me'et bnei Israel. You're going to take this money, this kippurim money, and you're going to give it to the work of the Ohel Moed. And it's going to be for Bnei Israel a remembrance before Hashem, lechaper al nafshotechem. And so this is what's going to bring us now into our lesson for today. Again, this was the foundation that we want to build in understanding what actually took place with Chet HaEgel. So I didn't translate that last pasuk, and it just says that we're going to give this money of Kippurim, this money that we're either going to use to cover ourselves, because God's going to understand that we're not perfect yet, so he's going to allow us to cover ourselves. It's also money that we're going to give to pay a fine for how much pakad went unutilized. And it's going to be used for the service of Ohel Moed. I actually would like to say that that is the service of Ohel Moed. The service of Ohel Moed is being able to come to Ohel Moed and recognize its greatest potential and our own greatest potential together with all of this, the edifice and all of its buildings, and with the help of the Kohen. So that's just the introduction to the Chet HaEgel. It gives some other vessels along the way. It talks about the Shabbat. It talks about Moshe receiving if you want to go to Perek Lamed Bet, the Parshiya actually starts with the last pasuk of Perek Lamed Aleph 31. It says that Moshe is given, when God finishes speaking to him on Har Sinai, he was given the two Luchot HaEdut, the two tablets of testimony, Even Ketuvim, they were stones They were written with the hand of Elohim. And it's beautiful also because if we wanted to see everything taking place here as being parallel to the creation of the world, if you just go back a few pesukim, you'll see our kiddush in verse 16, Veshamru b'nei Israel hashabat lasot et hashabat letoratam berit olam. The kiddush that we say on Saturday is right here. And so, Vayechulu hashamayim ve'aretz v'chol seva'am, the Friday night kiddush is when God created the world. The Saturday kiddush is when man is now going to recreate a world that is a place for God and man to unite. It happens to be very beautiful because it fits perfectly. Even the words kechaloto, vayechulu, there's so much here that speaks to creation. But now we get to verse 1. Verse 1 is a tough one to read. The people see that Moshe is delayed. Boshesh. We can't help from seeing the word boshesh. We can't help but think of Adam and Chava in the garden. Lo yit boshashu. They weren't clothed. They were in a place where they didn't have this thing maybe called busha. And here we have this word coming to tell us that we see that Moshe something happened to him. I'm going to say it was most possibly a delay. And he doesn't come down from the mountain. And the people all gather on Vayikahel ha'am al Aharon. Whenever people congregate on top of somebody, it's like they are overtaking them. They are rising up. An uprising maybe is a better word, on Aharon. And they say, Kum, they tell him, make us an Elohim. Now, this word Elohim has a lot of flexibility. It could be that they wanted a new God, but Elohim has been used in text earlier, like with Moshe and Aharon, when Moshe is going to come, Aharon's going to come to accompany Moshe to speak to Paro. Moshe is going to be his Elohim, like an instructor, a guide. So if you wanted to use that, you can, and you could say that they needed another guide because Zeh Moshe Ha'ish, because this man Moshe, who took us out of Mitzrayim, we don't know what happened to him. So on the one hand, it could be that what they wanted was a new guide. If I wanted to be generous and say, okay, their tour guide, MIA, we need another tour guide. We're in the middle of the desert. We don't know where to go, where to come. What's our next step? We need another guide. And Moshe had told Aharon at the time, you stay down here in case the people have any issues or need anything, you will be there for them. So that could be so far maybe pretty innocent. But then Aharon comes and tells the people to take off their gold that's in their ears or in the ears of their wives and their children and bring it to him. And they all do that. They take off their jewelry, they bring it to Aharon, he takes it from their hands. And then this is where it gets a little bit cloudy. Verse 4 here says that he took it, vayatzer oto becheret, and he literally fashioned it. So we're going to have two accountings of how this calf emerged. Vaya'asehu egel masecha. If I was a lawyer for Aharon, I wouldn't be so happy that the records have published this accounting where he literally takes it from, I'd like you to see it in the text because it's not me, but it's a pretty hard thing to overcome, where it says he took it from their hands, he bound it in a cloth, he fashioned it into a molten calf, that's the English, Vaya'asehu egel masecha, and then the people said, Ele Elohecha Yisrael, this is your Elohim, the one that took you out of Mitzrayim. I don't even enjoy reading these words. I I don't know what to do with them. I don't know how to process what the psyche of the people were. Is it possible that they thought that their earrings took them out of Mitzrayim? Is that even something that we want to contemplate? Is it possible that they were replacing Moshe, or maybe they started out in wanting to replace Moshe, and once they replaced Moshe, they very quickly descended into this spun out of control situation where they ended up replacing God also, and the whole situation became out of control. So if we go back to our little Aron analogy, or we go back to our Machatzit HaShekel analogy, what's taking place is, I think that God gave the cure, that he gave us the means by which to avoid these kinds of scenarios. Because when something in our lives seems very, very pressing and urgent, I counted 40 days and Moshe hasn't come down. I listened yesterday to the portion. It's a podcast. If you want to listen, very nice. It's a conversation about the Perashat. And they were saying in that portion, the problem was lack of patience, or one of the problems was a lack of patience. Had they only waited one day, then the solution or the situation would have resolved itself. That definitely is a way to look at this. I'd also like to say that if you live your life recognizing that you're just one half of the story, I want to rephrase that. You're not just one half of the story. You are one full half. I know it's an oxymoron. Don't minimize your half to the story. We spend so much time saying we're the bottom box and God's the top box. And we spend so much time saying how the lid has the keruvim, the cherubs with God's Shekhinah. But then Machatzit HaShekel comes and says, just because my part of the box has all the exciting, angelic elements and all this beautiful architecture and structure to it, don't you look at yourselves as just being just a box. You too have what to offer. And right now, your box is missing its lid, let's say. Right now, if you see Moshe, and that maybe that's why the word is so interchangeable, are they talking about replacing God? Are they talking about replacing Moshe? Because in the same pasuk that they say, make us an Elohim, because Moshe isn't here. They should have just said, Aaron, you be our leader until Moshe gets back. Or if he doesn't come back, you'll just continue. You'll be a substitute. You'll stand in his stead. They don't say that. Instead, what happens is they start to mix up the two. They take Moshe and they put him in a totally different category, and they say that Moshe missing possibly to them was like they didn't just lose Moshe, but they also lost their connection to God. And Machatzit HaShekel says, what are you talking about? Every one of you has your own connection to God. Moshe's presence does not dictate whether or not you have a presence to God. It goes back to everything we've been saying from the time of Yitro. Yes, you need a guide, and yes, you need Moshe. But don't forget that every one of you, every single one of you has an upper body and a lower body and has a direct connection to God. So if you don't have Moshe who's going to connect you to God, guess what? You can still connect to God. You don't have to bring a foreign object into the story in order to connect to God. And I think one of the beautiful things in the Parashat is when God is finally going to forgive the people, and I'll take you there quickly because I see I'm running out of time or ran out already, but I'll be quick. On page 506, at the end of chapter 33, where Moshe says, Had'eni na et kevodecha, please God, I need to see you. And God says, I'm going to pass all my goodness on your face, and I'm going to call out in the name of God. This is where we're going to get our 13 midot, the Hashem, El Rachum V'Chanun. But before we get that, I want you to see what God says. He says, Lo tuchal lir'ot et panai. You're not going to be able to see my face. Ki lo yad ani ha'adam v'chai. Because man or Adam had not seen me and lived. I know it seems that the English might say that it's impossible. You can't possibly see my face and live. But I'll say, Lo yir'ani ha'adam, man has not been able to see me. And I'll take you to where I'm referring to in a minute, because the next part says, Hashem tells Moshe, there's a place with me right here on the rock. I want you, v'nitzavta al hatzur. There's a makom iti, there's a place, right? You want to stand right next to me? Come stand right next to me on the tzur, on the rock. And we're talking about, what is God saying? Why does God want Moshe to stand with him on the rock? And what is that even reminiscent of? If you'll turn quickly to chapter 17 in Perashat Beshalach, I'm still in the book of Shemot. What happens here? It's a scenario where Moshe and God are also going to be on a rock. And in verse 6, he says, Hineni omed lefanecha sham al hatzur. God says, I'm going to stand on the rock waiting for you, Bechorev, which we could really say was Har Sinai. And at that point, you're going to hit the rock, and from it, water is going to come out, and the people will have the water that they need. What is it that they want? The people want to uskaluni. If you'll see the end of verse 4, Moshe is saying, people are going to take rocks and throw them at me and kill me because they are so thirsty that they want water. And what does God say? Uskaluni. They're going to use rocks to kill you? Guess what, Moshe? You're going to use rocks to revive them. The very thing by which they were going to use to stone you, you're going to use stones in particular, specifically, in order to revive them. And that, to me, is the perfect example of integration. You're going to take one stone that could be used for killing, and you're going to use that same stone, and it's going to revive the people. What is God telling Moshe now in our Perashat? V'nitzavta al hatzur. You know what you have to do, Moshe? You have to stand on that rock again, and you have to recognize that the very same thing, the very same person, the very same entity has the ability to go in two opposite directions. They can go to the lowest of low, and they can go to the highest of high. And he tells him, Bahayam, back in chapter 33, Ba'avur kevodi. Guess what happened when we, I think I have the verse over here. I don't have it. But when God was going, let me just see if it's here. Yeah, here it is. Give me 1 second. Avor, here it is. If you have your ribbon on both pages, in chapter 17, where God had told Moshe, because the people wanted to stone him, to use rocks instead of for killing, for reviving, the words that are used in verse 5 is Vayomer Hashem el Moshe avor lefanai ha'am. This idea of passing in front of, it's the same word that we use with the shekalim, avor lefanai. And here in our chapter 33, verse 22, Vehaya ba'avor kevodi. You know what God is saying? God is saying, I let you pass by me, and now I am going to pass by you. And when I pass by you, I am going to use my hands to cover up your face. And when I remove my hands, you'll see the back of me, but you won't see the front of me. I'd like to suggest something very, very interesting, that if everything we've been doing up until now was God giving us an opportunity to, I say this with kavod, I don't mean, I'm just using a anthropomorphism, like God's hands and his face. I want to say that God's giving us a chance to sort of walk in his shoes, or maybe it's better to say to walk in his ways. What is he doing? He's going to walk in our ways so that we could walk in his ways. What does that even mean? God is going to now mimic the way that we've been relating to him. The way we've been relating to him is we've been doing what? We've been covering our eyes. He came on Har Sinai, he gave us an opportunity for us to encounter him, and we recoiled. And now God is saying, guess what? I'm going to walk in front of you in the very same way that you walk in front of me. And when I walk in front of you, your face is going to be covered. And we always thought of it that God is covering Moshe's face, but really what he's doing is this hester panim. God doesn't cover up his own face. Hester panim means we cover up our own face, and therefore we can't see God's face. We could only see achorai. We could only see the after effects. We can't see the process. And many people take these pesukim to say that God's ways, the way he operates in his world, is you can't see before an event takes place. We can't see in the future. We could only see it after the fact. We could only see achorai, after things take place. But I would like to suggest that maybe what Hashem is telling us is that in order to have a panim el panim experience, in order to be able to have this, what Perashat Shekalim was asking us to do, which is have God's presence in our lives in a very, very concentrated way constantly, is that we have to, when it says panai lo yira'u, we have to be able to be willing to see God from the beginning. The panim, which is the first thing you see of a person, from the beginning we have to see God. What is Perashat Shekalim saying? After the fact, yeah, everybody's a hero. Everybody's a Monday morning quarterback. After the fact, everybody could guess what the outcome is going to be. Having God in your life, panim el panim, meaning before I know the outcome, from the onset, from the very beginning, if I could see God in the picture while it's still dark, while there's still doubt, while there's still an urgency or a scariness, if I could see God in the picture then, if I can see his panim then that is going to be the ultimate understanding and bringing God into our lives. Yes, we make Seudah Hoda'an, we thank God after we finish something that was traumatic. Perashat Shekalim, and I think this as well, so just to relate it to Chet HaEgel, had they at that point of fear and insecurity and uncertainty, had they seen God in the picture, had they said what Moshe says, I can't imagine that God would have taken us all the way out of Egypt just to kill us in the desert. He must have something up his sleeve. He must have a plan. He's the one who sent the frogs. He's the one who split the sea. If we would have seen a positive, happy ending during the time of uncertainty, then we never would have had to go through the whole Chet HaEgel. And maybe that's why Parashat Shekalim comes before Chet HaEgel, because it's telling every one of us, to the extent that we have pakad in our lives, to the extent that we infuse our internal monologues, to the extent that it governs our every thought and our every decision, to the extent that we believe that what we can't see actually has tremendous potential in our physical world, to that extent, that is going to guide us and guard us from falling prey to all the other crazy things that happen when we imagine, God forbid, the worst case scenario. We make poor judgment. We make poor choices when we imagine the worst case scenario. And God is telling us here and now, think to yourselves, I am your crown. Use your intellect, use your upper body, use your own lid of your body, your head. Tis'u et rosh, lift up your head. Don't look down. Don't look at the negative. Look up. You have a problem. What do? You should look up. Don't look down. The minute you look down, you trip and you fall. You go where your eyes are looking. That's what they tell you in physical therapy. Wherever you look, that's when you're riding a bike. You look this way, you go this way. You look that way, end up that way. Look up. Look up. And in looking up and recognizing that God has solutions for us because he created us, he created the scenario, he created the physical world, pikudim, remember that. Remember all the greatness that he's already done, and that'll carry you through the future greatnesses that God willing he has in store for each and every one of us. And God willing, this Adad, we will have more stories to tell about how situations have been transformed to ways that we never could have imagined with the limited capacity in our minds. I'm just sorry I went over time. I thank you for joining. I wish everybody a beautiful Shabbat, a beautiful week, a beautiful month. And please only look up, think of the positive, and good things will come your way. The Torah is guaranteeing it.